I'm Whitney.
I'm Mindy.
And I'm Deb.
We're three best friends who love nerdy things.
Well, some people think we're nerdy, but we think we're pretty awesome.
This is our nerdiest thing.
This season, we are discussing A Court of Thorns and Roses and all of Sarah J. Maas's books. We are spoiler friendly, so listen at your own risk.
So now we come to a part of the podcast that I would like to call our nerdiest vocabulary. Let's face it, when you're reading these books, sometimes you come across words that, particularly names, that are hard to pronounce or you just don't want to pronounce. I know some people just skip over them. I can't do that. I'm a word nerd. So I'm looking at a couple of words in this chapter. The first one is the place where the Fae reside that she talks about, and it's Prythian. But let's be honest, somebody probably thought it was Prythian.
I thought it was Pyrithian.
Pyrithian. Ooh, that sounds very
delicious.
Fiery. So every time you see that, it's Prythian, not Prythian. And then, of course, the big one, our heroine, which it could be, let's see here. These are all the ones I came up with. Fire, Fair, Fairy. We all know, as it tells us in the book, specifically, it's Feyre.
Something that we're going to be doing in every podcast and after a cocktail or two is doing our nerdiest recap. So we'll be drawing from a hat from the three of us to see who has to do a 30-second recap tonight. I am super nervous. My heart is racing and I don't really want to do this. So I hope Mindy or Whitney get it. Let's see. Okay, one of you pick a name. If it's me, I'm going to be very upset with you.
I think it might be.
It's not.
All right, ready, set, go.
Okay, so the book opens with Feyre in the woods. She is trying to get food for her family, and she sees a super tasty deer. We also find out that she is the only hunter in the family and that her family doesn't do shit. So she sees this tasty deer, and then a wolf comes out of the woods, and she decides, you know what? That wolf looks super big and hairy, and I think I want to shoot that too. So she shoots the wolf in the eye. Long story short, she kills him with some really cool ash woods, and I only have 4 seconds left. She goes home. Her family's shitty, and that's into chapter 2.
Time's up.
Was that great or what?
That was so fantastic.
Good. Okay, so thank you so much, Whitney, for drawing me for the very first Our Nerdiest recap.
You're welcome.
So excited to butcher that. But I wanted to ask you if you would go ahead and start first with your notes, since you did a really deep dive on Beauty and the Beast and its origins. And I can't wait to hear about your 3 pages of notes.
Yeah. So I definitely did do a deep dive. This book was, I think it was you guys when you first recommended it to me that described it as kind of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So I did a little bit of a deep dive on the history of the story Beauty and the Beast. Obviously, there's the very much Disney-fied version, but that is not where the story started. I also did a little bit of research on Feyre and her actual name and what it means, and also the Archeron sisters. So Feyre means beautiful and fair, based on an Old English word. And it also has some connections to the words for elf and fairy, which makes a lot of sense.
Interesting.
Archeron, the family name, comes, or not necessarily comes from, I assume that it does. It's very similar to Acheron or Acheron, which is the fabled river of the lower world in Greek mythology. It's called the River of Sorrow. And just that imagery of a bow and arrow is used to talk about truth-telling, power, and insight. So I thought that was interesting for our 3 sisters. And of course, Feyre's sisters, Nesta and Elaine. Elaine is a word for fawn in Welsh, which we see later in Wings and Ruin. Elaine is referred to as the wide-eyed doe and the fawn by a couple of other characters. You're always
going to remember more about subsequent books than Mindy and I do.
I've read them like 7 times. And then Nesta actually is a name in a couple of different languages. as a Welsh name, it's gender neutral. That means pure. In Jamaican, it's also gender neutral and means messenger. And then in Italian, there is a male name, Onesto. So Onesta would be the female version, which would mean man or woman of dignity and integrity, which I thought was interesting, especially because Nesta is so hated upon by so many people.
But
me.
I want to talk about this in a few minutes because I'm not real sure Nesta has dignity or integrity, even though I don't disagree with some of the things she does. So let's unpack that when we get beyond this.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a question for Sarah Janet. Sarah J.
We're not supposed to give that away on our podcast that we would like Sarah J. Maas to listen to.
So I did a deep dive into Beauty and the Beast, and just to give props for the website, I got this. I loved this name so much. pookpress.co.uk and Wikipedia. Thank you for your service.
How do you spell that?
POOKPRESS. Pookpress.co.uk. That's assuming I wrote it down correctly, which I think I did. So Beauty and the Beast is believed to be rooted in the Greek myth for Cupid and Psyche. So the real quick and dirty version of Cupid and Psyche is that Psyche is beautiful and gorgeous and people just love her. And the goddess Venus is very jealous of her because she thinks that the humans are going to forget about her, Venus, because they're focused on Psyche. So Venus plans to basically punish Psyche and get rid of her so that Venus can then have all the attention of the humans again. So she basically asks her son Cupid, hey, can you use one of your arrows, to make Psyche fall in love with this like beastly, horrible creature? And Cupid says, sure, but then he actually falls in love with Psyche. He takes her away and marries her in secret so that not even Psyche knows that she's married to Cupid. And so then Venus finds out about it, gets really upset, tries to kill Psyche, has Psyche do some impossible tasks as her slave to try to get forgiveness for basically Venus hating her. So the story itself comes from this myth and started off in the Beauty and the Beast, kind of that we know it as a French story. In the original French Beauty and the Beast story, the Beast was actually a young prince who lost his father and whose mother had to wage war to defend his kingdom. The queen, his mother, left him in the care of an evil fairy, and it was not clear if the queen knew if it was an evil fairy or if she thought it was a good fairy and was surprised to find out it was evil. I thought it would be interesting if the mom left her son in the care of an evil fairy knowing it was evil, but I wasn't able to figure that out. The evil fairy tried to seduce him when he became an adult, which is like super creep factor if she helped raise him, and he refused. And so she transformed him into a beast in anger and I guess disappointment and rejection. Belle was not actually a merchant's daughter, but the offspring of a king and a good fairy. The wicked fairy tried to murder Belle so that the wicked fairy could marry Belle's father, the king, and Belle was put in the place of a merchant's dead daughter to protect her. So it's like a super convoluted, kind of like the Disney version of Beauty and the Beast, but not really. Disney definitely like cleaned that up and put a nice pretty little bow on it. But
they don't sing about this provincial life.
No, they don't.
In the original Beauty and the Beast.
They don't. There's actually a second French story of Beauty and the Beast based on that original one that I just described, where the author basically like took the original story and added in a lot more political components and a lot more kind of cultural commentary on what was going on in France at the time. And then Disney took the story and, Disneyfied it. So I thought it was really interesting because there's a lot, and I'm going to refer back to this as we keep reading and once we get under the mountain and stuff, because especially in the Cupid and Psyche myth, there's a lot of parallels to what Amarantha is doing, what she's doing to Tamlin, why Tamlin is being punished, why any of this is happening in the first place. As we read through that, I'll refer back to the Cupid and Psyche myth. But
you guys can't see this, but I'm staring into Whitney's eyes because I'm so entranced by what she's saying.
I kind of feel like I'm in English class.
Well, I was a high school English teacher, so
I'm
you can
sorry.
take me out of the classroom, but you can't take the classroom out of me, I guess.
Side note, I'm a nerd and I loved English class.
So in the Disney-fied Beauty and the Beast, Belle is very much the Disney princess.
Hold on. If we're not allowed to say Disney on this podcast, we're real sorry. We didn't mean to. This is our first episode. And go.
So in the most familiar version of Beauty and the Beast, Belle is very damsel in distress, right? She's very virginal. She's very intelligent. She's very beautiful. She's so beautiful and intelligent that her villager people are like, what a weirdo. She likes to read books, right? And there's this whole segment of Belle's personality where she wants to escape her actual life because she thinks that there's something else out there for her. But for her, in that most familiar version, her escape is through these like really optimistic intellectual like literature classics, right? And that's like the acceptable kind of positive rainbows and unicorns kind of escapism. And what I love about Feyre is that she is a whole person. Like, she's flawed and she wants to escape her reality just like Belle in Beauty and the Beast, but it's in a really cynical, jaded way. And she ends up literally escaping her reality by physically going somewhere else. But you know, Feyre is not virginal. She uses her sexual relationship with this Isaac guy to escape her reality. She uses painting. She uses art. She uses hunting. She uses her anger toward her family as all these different ways to kind of distract her from what her life is actually like. But she is very far from the damsel in distress. She is 100% in distress, but
she ain't no damsel.
She's not. Yeah, she's not. Like, she needs somebody to come in and rescue her, but also she's doing that herself. And I just really appreciate that about her. She's a whole person. She is flawed. And we see that from the get-go. And I just really love that.
Something that occurred to me when you were talking too is a contrast between Feyre and Belle is that Belle, like you said, escapes into books and is this really intelligent. And we find out even this early on that Feyre doesn't know how to read. She doesn't know how to write. She never was educated. So there's already like this different side of that heroine that hasn't had all the education and extra stuff that to work from.
And you know who does read to escape? Nesta.
And Debra. And Mindy.
and Whitney.
Every day.
Right. Well, I mean, in Silver Flames, you see Nesta, and even before that, in Wings and Ruin, you know, when Feyre gets back to the Night Court, she finds Nesta in the library reading a book, right? And I just think it's so funny as a lover of Nesta that Sarah Maas gave Nesta that very Belle-like quality, right? Of somebody who escapes through reading. And now we know in Silver Flames that she is not reading like the literary classics.
She's reading the kinds of things
She's reading the stuff that we like to read, right? And so that makes her a little bit less virginal, which is kind of the whole point of Silver Flames. But I just think that's interesting that she gives this very flawed character of Nesta these kind of sort of redeeming Belle-like qualities when really Feyre is the one who is the Belle of the story.
So I do have something I want to ask about that, but I would like to point out that especially before Silver Flames, and I've heard a lot of people say that they don't want to read that one because they don't like Nesta. Sarah J. Maas has really created this character that you want to hate. So I find that she put the Belle character into someone that readers don't necessarily respect at that time. And speaking of respect, I want to go back to something that you said about having this virginal quality. The first chapter talks about Isaac Hale and that Feyre essentially rolls in the hay with him. And then in the second chapter, Nesta is essentially outing Feyre in front of their father. And why in the hell do all of these authors think that the girls need to be virgins? First of all, that's not very sexy to me. We just said what we like to read. That's not super sexy.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that a lot of authors that we probably grew up reading and the books that we had to read for school were written by guys and not women. Like, I feel like the female author focus is really recent, at least for me in the stuff that I read. And I know that, you know, I was an English major. Like, I wanted to be an English teacher. I majored in English. I got my bachelor's in English. I got my master's in English. We read a lot of male authors, and especially old, you know, like 1800s. That's what men were writing about. That's what they wanted, right? Like, they wanted a virginal girl. And so that became like a trope of literature, you know?
I'm literally holding my finger up to Whitney like, hold on, I have something to say. One of our favorite series, and I'm not going to call anyone out. I'm doing a re-listen right now. So if you pay attention at the end where we talk about our nerdiest moment of the week, I will say who. But one of our favorite authors, her main character that we fall in love with is a virgin, and she is a strong feminist woman. So I mean, I agree with you that it is a male dominated field, just like everything else in the world. This could also be called my feminist podcast. But a woman that I think is a really amazing author, her main character is a virgin. And I read another series of this person and the guy's a virgin. Like, why?
Well, I know what book series you're talking about, right? And that is a very specific character choice that author is making, to have that protagonist be a virgin, because that is part of how she is building the world around that main character, right? Like, it's a house of cards that's going to fall. And the whole point, I think, of having that very specific character choice of virginity is about how the people around her are treating her and the mistreatment of her.
Okay, I'll back down.
In that instance, I think it's a really specific choice.
Yeah, and you're right, because that is a big part of the story, is this like pure person, right? And I will say that I think a lot of the men authors, primarily ones from 1800s, when you said old, I was like, whoa, hold on, because I'm older than you, and so is Mindy.
Not by much.
And so you're right, because they were writing about it in terms of it being like sexually appealing. And I'm just sorry, like, virgin sex is not good sex. It's just not.
Well, and I think, you know, just like it was a very specific choice for one author to make their main character a virgin, it was a very specific choice in Thorn and Roses to make the main character not a virgin, because there are other characters who are, right? Like, both of the other sisters, we find out later, at this point, both of the other sisters are virgins. Nesta is a virgin at this point. Elaine is a virgin at this point. Feyre is not. And that was a really specific choice, especially knowing that she's kind of doing a reworking of Beauty and the Beast, or reworking of Cupid and Psyche, whatever. Like, she very deliberately made Feyre experienced and worldly, right? And I think that's to show her how she's dealing with everything that's going on in her life, right? Like, she is using this relationship with Isaac as a way to escape her reality. Like, it doesn't mean anything to her. I can't remember if it was in these first two chapters or if it's a little bit later, but like, she pretty clearly says at one point in this book, like, I am not like in love with Isaac Hale, like, whatever, he can go get married to whoever, that's fine, but I need a little bit of a release, literally a roll in the hay, and then I can go about my day and I'm fine. Thank you so much for your service, Isaac.
So if Isaac is a means to escapism, I think we should talk a little bit about mental health, not only Feyre's, but also, you know, her sisters and her fathers and their coping mechanisms. So, you know, I'd love to hear from both of you what you think about the mental health of these characters.
That's something that really, really, really stood out to me, because, you know, as we see in this chapter, they used to be very well off, and things, you know, circumstances changed, and now they've been in poverty for 8 years and their money runs out. And this is all very traumatic. This is a traumatic experience. And I love actually how the three sisters are demonstrated as the different ways to cope with trauma. So you've got Feyre, which her response to trauma is to become a total badass. And mind you, she's the youngest, which is sort of, I think maybe not what you would typically think. But she responds by being the provider. She's like, okay, shit needs to get done. I'm going to do it.
So can I point out, too, that I actually underlined this in the book. I was like, wait, Feyre's the youngest? Because Nesta and Elaine come off as the biggest
super
babies,
childish. Yeah,
in the entire world in these first 2 chapters.
Agreed. So that was surprising to me, too, to kind of realize that she ends up being the one that you would think would be the oldest because of the way that she responds to her trauma.
I think one of the reasons that Elaine and Nesta are so like baby-ish partly is because they have more experience with being pampered with the money, and Feyre doesn't.
So Nesta's response to trauma, and this is a very, very typical response. I work in an elementary school, and you see this behaviorally so much, that her response is to just become bitter and like nasty and mean and just a total bitch. I'm not saying that elementary kids schools are bitches, by the way, but that's a very, very typical response, especially for somebody like you said, Whitney, who is already being pampered. To respond to that sort of trauma is to just be completely negative and just pissed off at the world. And then you have Elaine, who is the middle child, by the way, which I have 3 children, and my middle child is definitely the sassiest one. But the middle child always feels like they're left out. And this may be an unpopular opinion, but I think Elaine is a worse person than Nesta. And I'll tell you why. Because she is completely
oblivious.
Yes. Well, and Feyre actually says Elaine is not cruel, unlike Nesta, but that she couldn't tell if she was blind to their situation or just refused to accept it. And in my opinion, it might be a little bit of both, but I really feel like she just is completely just doesn't want to accept it, like in complete denial.
But that's her coping mechanism, right?
And that's just me again. Like, everybody has a different way that they respond to trauma. My response is never to be completely docile. And I think for me, as somebody who relates to characters, she is the most unrelatable to me, and she really pisses me off.
Well, one thing I think is important to remember too about, what we see and hear from Nesta and Elaine, we are getting all of this from Feyre. Feyre is our narrator, right? She is the one that is giving us all this information from her perspective. So you have to keep in mind that we're getting the little sisters kind of resentful view of her older sisters. So we're not getting a super objective view of who Nesta is and who Elaine is. Like, Feyre is telling us who they are.
Do you know who we are getting an objective view from, in her own words, is Feyre. And she never says that she's depressed or anxious and as someone that lives with depression and anxiety, I feel like on the first page, you're like, oh, this girl could use some antidepressants, maybe a little Wellbutrin on the side, little, antidepressant cocktail. But she actually describes herself in the book as someone that has lost hope. She no longer sees colors. She's no longer painting. She doesn't see shapes. And for me, the main thing I see in myself when I'm depressed is the lack of wanting to do anything. And if you're an artist and you stop painting, it's the worst possible thing you can do for yourself.
Well, and one thing I noticed about the sisters too, at this point anyway in the story, Feyre has art. Feyre has painting. She has been able to cultivate this piece of herself that makes her like a whole person, right? Like, she is herself. She feels most like herself when she is thinking and acting with an artist's brain and perspective. And I just feel like Elaine and Nesta, especially at this point, they have not been afforded that opportunity to figure out what it is that makes them feel like them. And we find out later in Silver Flames, at least for Nesta, like, music and dancing are huge for her. Like, that is what makes her feel like her. But at the beginning of, Thorn and Roses, she doesn't have any opportunity to indulge that at all. And so she's operating at a deficit because she doesn't get to be a whole person because they've lost their ability to go listen to a symphony or go to a ball, for her to be able to dance. Like, she is not ever able to feel like herself. And at this point, I mean, later on, Elaine is a big gardener, right? And she starts baking with the twins in the Night Court and later books. But again, like, just like Nesta, like, she doesn't have that opportunity to do that. I'll say it a million times. I love Nesta. I don't love Elaine. I love Nesta. And I will defend her to the death, to the end.
I agree, like, 100% what you said about Nesta, but Elaine's already gardening. Like, Feyre's bought her seeds, like, and all that stuff. So Elaine already has that. She is, like, the most selfish character, in my opinion. And I don't know why. Like, I just can't relate to her at all. And I still don't. Like, in the later books, I just, like, and I will admit, I'm one of the ones that was like, I don't know if I want to read Nesta's book because I kind of don't like her. But there's something almost likable about a non-likable character because Nesta's so well developed. And I don't know what it is about Elaine, and I'm sure we'll get some other insights later on. I feel very certain that we'll get a book from Elaine's perspective, but she just seems super selfish to me. And in my opinion, Nesta is greater than Elaine.
I think the only other thing that I had written down about the sisters is that Feyre, in these first couple of chapters, Feyre groups Nesta and Elaine together the entire time. It's not like Elaine is my favorite sister and Nesta is just awful. If only it were just me and Elaine. Like, she groups Nesta and Elaine together the entire time, and she kind of attributes it to different things, but they're not good sisters, either one of them, according to Feyre. Right?
I liked what you said about the description of those two characters coming from Feyre's point of view, though, because she even talks about hoping that they will marry off and move out so that she can have a silent house, there's more food to eat, and that she can afford paint. Like, she literally wants them to go. But to be honest, at this point in the books, and I'm with you, 100% Nesta lover. But I really feel like if I were her at this point in the story, I'd be like, yeah, you need to get married and go.
Well, yeah, because that would relieve so much pressure off of Feyre, right? Like, she's providing for 4 people, including herself. She's providing for 4 adult people. And if Nesta and Elaine would just, like, go, if they would just leave, then that would cut her pressure by half, right?
Now, what about the dad? Because, there's several references to him. His knees were broken by these creditors. His legs are all twisted up. It talks about for months or maybe even years, I can't remember, to be honest, that he didn't want to do anything. He would just sit by the fire, and now he at least carves wood, but that's not going to pay the bills. As we know, artists don't get paid ever, 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 even in this day and age. But, I think that there's some trauma from him too, losing their fortune, losing his wife, and quite frankly, having 3 daughters that have their own issues at the same time.
Like, I honestly don't know what his deal is. Like, is he too prideful? Is he just totally checked out and just, like, can't deal? So, like, I don't know. Maybe it is a mental health issue with him as well. Like, it doesn't really say who took care of the girls, but I would assume the mother was sort of the main caretaker of them, even though it also mentions that she doesn't really care about the girls. And so maybe, like, they just didn't have anybody. Like, nobody cared about them when they were young. I don't know. But he definitely seems super checked out, which, in my opinion, is another super red flag.
I think that the Archeron parents are a huge, like, mystery and a huge missing piece of the puzzle, because we know from these first 2 chapters and also from later books, Feyre's mother was not present. She was not nurturing. She was not loving. She did not take care of her kids. She did not actually care that much about her kids. In these first 2 chapters, at one point, Feyre says that her father is the only one that her mother actually loved and cared about. And so there's this, it's like this giant missing piece of this puzzle to explain, why is the dad the way that he is? Why does he react the way that he reacts? Why these 3 sisters end up the way that they end up? And especially in Silver Flames later on, we get a lot more information about the mother and how the relationship between the Archeron mom and Nesta kind of was a real weird business transactional thing.
Let's talk about that, because I want to point out too that the dad, and I don't think it ever says his name, so let's call him Daddy Archeron. Daddy Archeron, whenever Feyre later in the books is kidnapped by Tamlin and goes to the Spring Court, he does make sure that her family is provided for. That's one of her main worries, is that she's the huntress. She's essentially the shopper. She takes care of shit. So Tamlin makes sure that they're taken care of, and everything's good after that, right? And even in Wings and Ruin, whenever Daddy Archeron is still pretty absent until closer to the end of the book, and then he brings in these warships, and he's like this revived man, but he only was a revived man when he had money again. Mm-hmm. And I think that says a lot about his character. And I'm not going to lie. Living in poverty is a horrible thing, and it definitely makes you act like a different person, but he completely lost himself. He didn't try to take care of the girls at all. He put everything on Feyre. I mean, he wouldn't even, if he's a wood carver, great. It doesn't pay a lot, but it wasn't even like he was hustling for that. You know what I mean? And so, you can say that Feyre's mom doted on him, and so maybe it had more to do with her not being there.
Her being Feyre not being there, or the mom not being there?
The mom not being there. I wonder if he, was just so grief-stricken, and maybe he felt like having money again made it easier. I don't know. People say that money doesn't matter, but that's rich people that say that.
Well, one thing that I just wonder about is how their dad actually felt about them, because they talk about Feyre. Again, we're getting all this information from Feyre, which is not an objective point of view, right?
Do you not like Feyre?
No, I do. But I love Feyre, but the youngest sibling, the little sister, that, I'm a little sister, right? That comes with a lot of baggage, and I'm never going to be able to be a completely objective third party.
Have you ever killed and skinned a wolf for your brother and sister?
No, I
have.
I've killed spiders, and that's basically it.
I might call you next time. There's a huge one.
I walked into a mouse in my classroom one time, and I literally screamed and ran away. So I'm definitely not a Feyre.
Someday when we're talking about maybe shapeshifters or something, I'll tell you about the time we found a rat in our toilet. And I thought that Harper, my son, and my nephew were joking when they woke me up for that. I went back to bed, by the way.
But yeah, Feyre says, my mom didn't really love me. She didn't really love any of the 3 of us. She only really loved my dad. But we don't really know truly how her dad felt about the mom versus how he feels about his kids. Was it kind of the same? Did he love the mom more than he loved his girls? Because he absolutely shows up for them at the end of the 3rd book. But like you said, that's only after he gets money. So it's he did not show up for them when he did not have money. So it's again, there's this really big mystery and this giant missing piece that would explain a lot. And obviously, Sarah Janet has not explained it for a reason, right? I'm sure that this is a very deliberate thing, that she has not gone into the backstory of the parents, but I really wish that you would. Sarah J. Thank you.
So we talked a lot about Feyre's father. I'd like to speak a little bit about Feyre's mother, who, quite frankly, seems horrible. So there is a quote in the first 2 chapters that I wanted to read. It's towards the end of chapter 2 that essentially explains, and you learn more about this in Nesta's book, about Feyre's mother grooming her for marriage, which I know this was done a lot back then, but it has really stuck with me even after all this time. There's even a story about how Nesta was put in front of this gentleman that another woman wanted and essentially stole his heart and then told him to fuck off. So one thing that her mom is quoted for saying is that Elaine shall wed for love and beauty, but you, my cunning little queen, aka Nesta, shall wed for conquest. And I feel like, we've said a million times we're big Nesta fans. It sets Nesta up for this world of conquest. So that's all she's here for. She's supposed to marry rich. She's supposed to keep the family line going. But that also doesn't count what Feyre's mother put on Feyre at that same time, in terms of, on her deathbed, she said, well, you better feed people and you better make sure they have clothes, because if not, you're all going to be fucked. So, youngest sibling or not, and again, from Feyre's point of view or not, the mom was definitely grooming them for different things. And it's really a little messed up when you really think about it.
Well, and again, who is this woman? Right?
I have a theory about that I read online.
Ooh.
Whenever you're ready.
Well, because it's just, what is her background? Where did she meet her husband? Because she, Feyre says she loved their father. She loved him, and he was the only one that she ever truly loved and cared about. So it's what did she experience in her own upbringing? What did her mom tell her? That she is raising her kids in this way and that she is giving these messages to her daughters. What kind of trauma did the mom experience to be that person that she was, right? And to put all that pressure on Nesta, to put all that pressure on Feyre, I would really love a prequel novella of the Archeron parents meeting and getting some background on that. I don't know if that would ever happen, but I would love
Sarah J.
it.
Maas, the call has been
Sarah
set
J.
forth.
Challenge.
Is that what you were saying? All I heard was finish him. Let's go into this theory that I found online. We've not heard about the Archeron mama from Sarah J. Maas at all, which we know, and I'm sure we'll get into this in subsequent chapters, that she is very deliberate about what she writes across all of her 3 fandoms, right? So there is a theory that the Archeron mother is actually the 6th queen, that we don't know who that is. And here's why.
Ooh.
Right? I know. I feel like I could go down a rabbit hole for days about this. So this theory claims that Nesta was never actually fully human. And the reason why that this author thinks that, and the theory does state that Feyre and Elaine are her biological daughters, but that the Mama Archeron actually had Nesta with a fairy. And here's why. Nesta is immune to glamours, and that the throne the throne was passed to Nesta when her mother died, and Nesta has been described as a queen without a throne.
Ooh.
Nice.
Now, normally Whitney has something to say to debunk what I'm saying, so I'm staring at her in the eye right now.
I was going to, and again, I'm the oldest one of us 3 and probably the most senile. So maybe I'm wrong, but doesn't it, in that what it happens, the 6th queen dies, but they pretend she's not dead?
No one knows what happened to the 6th queen. Right?
That's true. She's not around, right?
No, yeah, we've never actually seen, quote unquote, seen from the reader's point of view, the 6th queen.
Isn't the 6th queen the queen they find at the lake? Oh. The bird, the Vasa. Firebird? Vasa, thank you.
Is it?
Isn't it?
I don't know.
I think it might be.
I mean, that's what they theorized.
But I mean, Vasa could. Vasa.
I knew you were going to debunk me. I should have called you before we recorded
Well,
this.
no, but I mean, Vasa, they say that Vasa is very, very young, but also like very sly and very smart. And so they have to get rid of her. So it could make sense that if she's very young, somebody had to go away for her to take the throne as a young person.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. So, I mean, that still could be Mama Archeron, right? And we're hearing this from the lips of the other queens who are trying to manipulate the situation and kind of take the heat off of themselves at the same time, because it's very obvious they don't really want to work with the rest of Prithian.
Right.
And so they might just be being like, okay, here's what we're going to say. Are you going to say the same thing I'm going to say? And we're just going to say that it's Vasa. Because Vasa, that storyline's never really been, further explained either. So I don't know. I was kind of into this theory.
I definitely feel like, and this could just be nothing, but I feel like the mom is much deeper than we have been shown so far, because obviously Feyre and Nesta and Elaine are vital to this world and this whole like universe that this author has created, right? Like Feyre and Nesta have already shown their strength and their influence and why they're important, and we just haven't seen Elaine kind of like come into her own yet. And so I feel like if you've made these daughters so vital to this world, then their parents have to have something to do with that.
Yeah, and the reason that the theory I just mentioned holds so true for me is because Feyre became High Lady due to all of the drops of life that she was given under the mountain. And she gets a little bit of power from each High Lord, right? We know that Elaine might be a seer, but we've not really gotten through all of that yet. Nesta, by far, has the most magic, right? And she and Elaine went into the cauldron at the same time, same situation, all of that. So there's something different about Nesta that I'm not sure has been all the way fleshed out yet. I mean, it still talks about how she has power beyond what people can even comprehend, right? Like, and for all of you Nesta haters, read the damn book, because Cassian is hotter than hell. He says things that, I mean, they don't belong in pornos, but in my mind they do, which is okay. For the record, it's a really, really good book.
Don't read the book for Nesta. Read it for Cassian.
That's a really, really good point. And if you've seen any fan art of Cassian, if not, go look at it and you'll want to read the book if you've not yet. Just believe me in this. But Nesta has something going for her that the two other girls don't.
No, I think that's true, because one of my favorite scenes in all of these books in the whole series is in Silver Flames when Nesta comes out of the bog and Azriel
with the head.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and Azriel and Cassian both like bow to her because they can't not bow to her with her
Cassian
power.
bows to her in other ways too, which is another reason.
But Az does not. You know what I mean? And I love that journey for her.
I don't know. There's an illustrator on Instagram that even today called Ghost Nymphs that shows that Azriel does actually bow to her with Cassian. So go look it up.
One thing I really like about all three sisters is, we've kind of talked about their fraught relationship and their like kind of messed up family dynamics, but they genuinely like care for each other. And even we were talking earlier about Feyre, if you guys could just get married and leave and I could just like paint all day long, that would be so great. And, in these first two chapters, Nesta is talking about, I'm going to get engaged to this guy. I'm going to get engaged to this Tomas guy. And Feyre is like, you are absolutely not going to marry him, and it's like, all you want is for her to get married and go away so that you can have some of this pressure off of yourself. And then when you get that opportunity, you're like, no, this is not a good guy. And then Nesta does the exact same thing with Elaine in Mist and Fury when Elaine is engaged to Lord Grayson. Nesta,
they own a iron welding factory or whatever the equivalent of that would be, right?
Yeah, they have the ashwood trees or whatever, and Nesta is like, I don't think this is a great idea. And they're real sisters, right? Like they're a real like normal family where there's a whole lot of dysfunction, but there's also a lot of love and a lot of caring and taking care of each other. And I just really appreciate that. Like, you know, Nesta is billed as kind of this like super bitch, but at the same time, like she cares about Feyre. She cares about Elaine. She's much more willing to show her care for Elaine than she is about her care for Nesta or for Feyre. But it's definitely there because we find out later, you know, in these first 2 chapters of Thorns and Roses, she tells Feyre something like, you know, could you at least pretend you're not some ignorant peasant? And Feyre's like, that bitch is making fun of the fact that I can't read and that I'm illiterate. But we find out in Wings and Ruin, Nesta says, I did not know that you truly could not read. She says these horrible things, but she's just like a real sister in real life, right?
Right. I forgot what I was watching the other day, but they said you can't spell dysfunction without F-U-N. Like, way to go, Sarah J. Maas. Way to go.
All right, so we've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything that we have not hit yet that you guys wanted to make sure that we talked about?
One thing we really haven't talked about and we get just very minimal clues about is Prythian and the fairy world, which, I mean, as we know from reading all the books, is sort of a huge part of this world. And so we get our first indication of Prythian in these chapters. We know it's the home of the immortals, and that immortals fear death there. Like they fear the immortals. They feel that they will die if they enter that. You get your first description of the Fae, who they describe as strange folk, tall and eerie and deadly. You know that Feyre's village is actually, and this is something that I found interesting, is actually a 2 days journey from Prythian. Like I was in my mind,
it was like, you know, a
right
half
there.
A day's walk.
Yeah,
maybe.
like I thought, like, oh, we're so close to that wall or whatever, but it's actually a 2 days journey, and that somehow the mortals have done something wrong by the Fae, but we don't really know exactly what yet. Only that the Fae will like attack their villages and burn things and whatnot. Later on, when Feyre promises to her mom, she does mention in her, talking about how she did promise her mom she was doing this, and that to them a promise was sort of like your bond. But it mentions in that in our miserable human world, we're shielded only by the promise made by the High Fae 5 centuries ago. So you get this clue that there's some sort of pact or, agreement that they have with the immortals to sort of stay away from each other.
And here's the thing, because I would think if I had never seen a fairy or lost someone, she does mention people that go beyond the line and never come back, right? Or sometimes they'll see like weird looking people. I am always a little bit skeptical about things, and I would be like, well, like that's just folklore that your parents told you to get you to listen, right? And you get that feeling from Feyre until she talks about holding and carrying that Ashwood dagger. She has been carrying that for 3 years and not used it one single time. So, the threat of fairies has scared humanity so much that she carries something and literally spent their last pennies on to get and carried it around for 3 years before using it on someone.
Well, and the other thing that I kind of realized too is that Feyre is 19, right? So she was born roughly halfway through Amarantha's reign. So the Prythian that she has experienced and heard about, whatever, isn't the real Prythian.
Right, because the only High Lord that's outside of the mountain at that point is Tamlin, right?
Right.
And it is, Whitney, do you remember why? Because I know Tamlin kind of has to pay the debt, right? Like he's the beast in the true Beauty and the Beast story. He has to have someone fall in love with him before the 50 years are up. But why him? I can't remember.
I think later Rhys tells us basically, like, Amarantha was trying to seduce Tamlin, and
That's
Tamlin rejected her, and so she lashed out at him with this curse of, like, you could save everybody, but you have to do it this way, and it's probably not going to happen. I need you to find a girl who can kill a fae with hate in her heart and then make her fall in love with you. And, like, Rhys kind of tells us all that stuff later, which is where that, you know, Cupid and Psyche stuff kind of comes in, where Amarantha is absolutely the Venus of that story. But, you know, Feyre has not ever experienced fae the way that they truly are. Not that they're all, you know, super great and lovely and wonderful and would invite her over for dinner, but she's only ever experienced Amarantha's reign, and she just doesn't know it yet. You know,
that's a good point.
And so the super scary threat that Feyre feels from the High Fae is not actually what Prythian is really like, right?
Well, and that's a good point too, because it does talk about how they're scared because of all of the border towns getting burnt down near that line. Would you call it a line, I guess? So I call it a line in my head, or fence, or whatever you would want to call it. But we know that later on in this book, Feyre gives Amarantha a fake name and says that she's Claire so-and-so, and Amarantha kidnaps Claire to torture and burns down her house. So I'm always like, well, who at the border town pissed Amarantha off? And I felt like it was such an insignificant thing for the author to say that it makes more sense now that I'm thinking about it.
That's a lot of thoughts for chapters 1 and 2, but there's a lot of world building and there's a lot of characterization. So for next episode, we're going to be reading chapters 3 and 4 of A Court of Thorn and Roses. Before we say goodbye, let's talk about our nerdiest thing of the week. So Deb, why don't you go first? What's your nerdiest thing that you've done this week?
I've done 2 things. This is our inaugural episode. It's been really fun to record with the 2 best friends that anyone could have. But I also made us a cocktail to go with tonight's theme, and we will put the recipe on our Instagram page. But our cocktail for tonight was the Starving Artist. So that was really fun to research. In the book, it talks about how Feyre paints all over the house that one time that she could afford paint. So I thought I'd make us a Starving Artist cocktail. It's been nice and made us less nervous and perfect for what we needed. I think my second nerdiest thing is I am doing a reread or re-listen, I guess I should say, to the From Blood and Ash series right now. It's my 4th time. I hate to say that out loud, but damn, those books are so good. If you've not read those, you should definitely go pick up a copy. I read them first and then listen to them, which I would also highly recommend absorbing them both ways. What about you, Mindy?
For starters, I work in a library in an elementary school. I am the library clerk. And this week I was tasked with doing inventory of our entire library all by myself. And what was interesting was when I got started on it, it was actually very like calming and soothing, and I actually really enjoyed inventory. I think that's super nerdy to enjoy inventory. And now that I've finished scanning all the books, I have to go back and like figure out why some of them showed up in our catalog that didn't get scanned, and that like detective work actually like thrills me.
That sounds awful to me. I'm just going to say that out loud.
It really does when I say it out loud. Like, I'm like, that like sounds like the worst job ever. But that's why I'm nerdy, because it's like a mystery. It's like putting together a puzzle.
Can I just come check out the books for you? I don't want to be a detective.
I agree. That sounds terrible. That sounds terrible, Mindy, but I'm glad that you enjoyed it. So my nerdiest thing is kind of this is kind of a cop-out, but it's like a 3-way tie. So the first thing is that I got the Court of Thorn and Roses page overlays from Mad Schofield's.
God, she's so awesome.
They're just amazing. I love them. I just opened them and put them in the book today before the podcast. So that was really exciting. The second thing is that I took advantage of the summer sale in the JLA shop, the Jennifer Armentrout shop, and got a Draken travel blanket. Like, it's going to be a really small.
Will you bring it next time we record?
I literally bought it for the podcast because I tend to get cold. It was only $3.
I'd like to also say that Whitney and I both own a t-shirt that says Miss Willa Collins book club.
I should have worn it, but I didn't.
Next week.
Yeah, I'll wear it next week. And then the third, three-way tie is that to get myself hyped up for the podcast, I listened to my Twilight soundtracks. On the way over here, I listened to the Twilight soundtrack.
Which one?
Well, I have a playlist on our family Amazon Music, and it's called Whitney's Playlist, and it's basically just all of them, all of the Twilight soundtracks, and I put it on shuffle. And it actually, I had to turn on Eminem to pump me up because one of the songs made me feel kind of sad.
Was it the one where Bella's standing in front of the mirror pregnant and she's all hollow and shit? Because I've had that song stuck in my head forever.
I actually used to sing that to both of my children, as babies.
You mean as Bella was literally withering away?
I would literally sing that to my
wither
pregnant
away,
belly.
children.
Yeah, isn't that so weird?
Don't kill me while you're at it.
For exclusive content and to keep up with all things nerdy, follow us on Instagram at Our Nerdiest Thing. We post book reviews, what to read next, and our cocktail recipes. Have something nerdy that you'd like to share? Email us at ournerdiestthing@gmail.com. This podcast is edited and produced by The Story Guides. Thanks for listening.